Captain Lena Hawkey stood at the helm of the Juno's Fury, a massive battleship that cut through the void of space with purpose. Her crew, one of humanity's finest, was stationed at the farthest reaches of the galaxy, far beyond the fringes of known civilization. The star systems they patrolled were uncharted, dangerous, and filled with mysteries. Most of the time, it was just empty space and the occasional skirmish with pirates or rogue factions. Yet, for Hawkey, this was her life. A seasoned officer with years of military experience, she had seen more than her fair share of conflict. She had no illusions about what lay ahead, nothing more than routine, until the day her sensors picked up something that would change everything. It started as a faint signal, something so weak that at first Hawk assumed it was just cosmic interference. But her instinct told her otherwise. After days of careful analysis, the crew discovered that the signal wasn't random. It was deliberate. It was a distress call, buried in the data stream like a needle in a haystack. There was a reason it had been hidden. "Captain," came the voice of her communications officer, Lieutenant Arlen, over the intercom. "You need to see this." Hawk stepped into the bridge, her boots clicking against the cold metal floor. Arlen stood before the console, his fingers dancing across the controls. The screen flickered to life, revealing the faint, glitchy transmission from an unknown source. As the distortion cleared, a single, cryptic message appeared, the cry of humanity. Hawk felt a shiver crawl down her spine. There was something profoundly unsettling about those words. It wasn't a plea for help, nor was it a warning of danger. It was a cry, one that echoed across time and space. "What's it saying, Arlen?" Hawkey asked, her voice steady but filled with curiosity. The officer hesitated before responding. "It's in a language we don't recognize, Captain, but there's something familiar about it." I think it's human." "Human?" Hawkey repeated, her brow furrowing. "How is that possible? We're still analyzing the transmission. But it seems ancient, older than any records we have of humanity's early space explorations." It didn't make sense. How could a human message have survived for so long, buried light years from home? The mystery deepened as the data stream continued, revealing strange, fragmented images of what appeared to be a massive weapon, one that dwarfed anything the humans had ever built. A system of ancient technology, dormant but somehow still intact, hidden beneath the surface of a dying star, Zereth 9. Hawk's mind raced. Zereth 9 was in an unstable system, a giant star that was slowly collapsing in on itself. No one in their right mind would establish a base near such a hazardous place. Yet, here was a weapon, untouched by time, as if waiting for someone to find it. "We need to get closer," Hawk ordered, her voice sharp. "Prepare to move the ship into orbit around Zereth 9. We need answers." The crew worked quickly, bringing the Juno's Fury into a stable orbit around the dying star. As they drew closer, a massive, imposing structure came into view, a facility buried deep within the star's remnants. It was unlike anything they had seen before. The technology was advanced, far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. It looked alien, but at the same time, there was a familiarity to it. A cold, metallic design that seemed to pulse with energy, as though it was alive. "Captain!" Arlen called out, his voice laced with disbelief. "You won't believe this. The weapon. It's still active. Its core is generating energy." "How is that possible?" Hawk murmured, almost to herself. The star was dying. Everything in its vicinity should have been disintegrated by now. The very existence of this weapon was a paradox. "We're going to find out," she said firmly. "Prepare a team to board the station. We're going in." Upon entering the facility, Hawk and her crew were greeted by an eerie silence. The air was cold, sterile, and the walls were lined with strange symbols and alien designs. It was clear that the structure had been abandoned for centuries, maybe longer. Yet, it felt alive, as if the weapon inside was watching them, waiting for something. They made their way deeper into the facility, their footsteps echoing in the vast corridors. Eventually, they reached a central chamber, where a large console was embedded into the floor. In the center of the room, the weapon's core pulsated with an ominous glow. "Can you access it?" Hawkey asked, turning to her chief engineer, Commander Silas. Silas nodded and began typing on his console. "I can try. But the encryption is unlike anything we've seen. Whoever designed this knew how to keep secrets." Hours passed as the crew worked to decipher the technology. Then, suddenly, the entire facility came to life. The lights flickered, and the weapon's core hummed with energy. A series of data streams began to unfold on the screen. And then, a final message appeared. Embedded deep within the weapon's memory, Hawk's heart skipped a beat. She read the message again, feeling the weight of its meaning sink in. Her crew exchanged nervous glances. This was no ordinary weapon, and it wasn't just a relic of some long-lost alien race. This message was for them, for humanity, but the warning didn't stop there. The transmission continued, revealing that the galactic war was already underway, and humanity was no longer a neutral party. The Deathworlders, a ruthless, deadly empire of war-hardened alien species, had their sights set on them. They had seen humanity's potential, and it was a threat that could not be ignored. The message was clear: humanity's fleet, whether it existed or not, would be the deciding factor in this war. It wasn't a call for help, but a cry, a warning that the galaxy's deadliest forces were coming. And it was up to Captain Lena Hawke to prepare her people for the unimaginable. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything she could have anticipated. Captain Lena Hawke stood at the bridge of the Juno's Fury, staring at the display before her. The revelation from Zareth 9 still echoed in her mind. The message that had warned them, the weapon they had uncovered, and the ancient cry that had triggered everything. It felt as though 1,000 pieces were falling into place, but there were still gaps, missing connections she couldn't yet comprehend. The crew had been working around the clock, decrypting the rest of the transmission. It wasn't easy. The deeper they went, the more distorted the message became, filled with strange patterns, half-completed sentences, and cryptic warnings. There were no clear answers, only a growing sense of urgency. "Captain, you're gonna want to see this," came the voice of Arlen, her communications officer. His voice was shaky, an uncharacteristic sign of unease. Hawke quickly made her way to his console, her mind racing with possibilities. "What is it?" "We've just received an incoming transmission from an unknown source," Arlen replied. It's from the Deathworlders." The name sent a ripple of dread through the crew. The Deathworlders were legendary. A terrifying coalition of species known for their overwhelming power and ruthless conquests. But it wasn't just their physical might that made them feared. It was their history, their ability to adapt to any environment, to thrive in the harshest conditions. They were called Deathworlders because their worlds had been shaped by wars so brutal, survival was the ultimate test. No one in the galaxy truly knew why they feared humanity, but the message that followed was clear: they had arrived. The hologram flickered to life, revealing the terrifying visage of Rak Commander. Tall, imposing, their dark, chitinous exoskeleton gleamed in the artificial light. Their eyes were cold, devoid of mercy. A warning shot had been fired, and it was unmistakable. The Enrak were not here to negotiate. Captain Lena Hawke, the Enrak, spoke in a low, guttural tone. "You have disturbed something that was never meant to be touched. The weapon you have uncovered belongs to us. Its power has awakened a power struggle across the galaxy, and your interference will not be tolerated." Hawke's stomach tightened as she watched the commander's expression remain unreadable. There was no threat of war, only a cold promise of destruction. "We demand immediate access to your fleet's location," the Enrak continued. "Your species will not leave this place alive unless you comply. Your fleet will be ours to command." Hawke stood frozen, trying to read between the lines. Something didn't feel right. The Enrak were powerful, yes, but they weren't acting like conquerors. They weren't making demands like the typical invaders. It felt as though they were afraid of something connected to humanity. "Captain!" As the days passed, the tension on the Juno's Fury grew thicker. Hawke and her crew worked tirelessly to decrypt the remainder of the transmission, but the more they uncovered, the more baffling it became. It seemed as though humanity was central to a much larger conflict, a battle for power between the galaxy's deadliest factions. The message hinted at a key, A weapon, but it was clear now that it wasn't just about firepower. The more we dig into these transmissions, the more I believe they fear us, Commander Silas said, his voice thoughtful as he reviewed the data with Hawk. They don't want our fleet, they want humanity itself. Hawk frowned. But why? Why would they fear a species they've never encountered in full force? It's the adaptability, Silas replied. That's what's scaring them. Humanity has a unique ability to survive against impossible odds. The Deathworlders can't control that. They can't predict it. The realization hit Hawkeye like a thunderclap. They fear us because we're unpredictable. Exactly, Silas agreed. No matter what their plans are, humanity is the wild card. They can't control us. We're not like the other species they've conquered. But the more they uncovered, the more questions arose. If humanity was truly such a threat, why had they been isolated for so long? Why had they remained hidden in the outer fringes of the galaxy? Hawk began to feel the weight of her mission shift. She was no longer just looking for answers about an ancient weapon, she was uncovering secrets about her own species' past, a past that had been buried under layers of time and manipulation. Meanwhile, as the Juno's Fury remained in orbit around Azarath 9, another challenge emerged. A new faction arrived, a fleet of sleek, elegant ships that hailed from the HFY, an advanced and relatively neutral species. Their leader, Ambassador Vale, requested an immediate meeting with Hawkeye. "I've heard of the weapon," Vale said when they met in the war room. "We've monitored your progress. We know it holds secrets that could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. Our people offer you a deal. We will help you defeat the Deathworlders. But in exchange, we require access to the weapon's knowledge." Hawk studied the ambassador carefully. She didn't trust the HFY. They were diplomatic, yes, but too many species had agendas that didn't align with humanity's best interests. Yet, their offer was tempting. They had advanced technology, resources, and knowledge that could help her crew survive the looming threat of the Deathworlders. But there was a catch. "What's your true interest in the weapon, Ambassador?" Hawkeye asked, narrowing her eyes. "Why are you so eager to get involved?" Vale's expression didn't change. "The HFY seek only stability in the galaxy, Captain. We would prefer not to see another war, especially one that could consume us all. But we cannot allow the Deathworlders to control such power." Hawk could feel the tension between them. The HFY were hiding something. Their interests weren't purely altruistic. But before she could probe further, a shock came from within her own ranks. During an inspection of the weapon's mainframe, Lieutenant Mira, one of Hawk's most trusted officers, was caught in a covert communication with the NROC. Mira had been passing on sensitive information, and it became clear she had betrayed them. She had aligned herself with the NROC in exchange for power and wealth. The revelation hit hard. Hawk felt a deep sting of betrayal. Mira had been more than a subordinate, she had been a friend. Yet, her actions had shattered any semblance of unity on the Juno's Fury. With the NROC and the HFY both vying for control of the weapon, Hawk found herself in an impossible position. To survive, she would have to make dangerous choices and navigate a web of deceit that threatened to tear her crew apart. As Hawk stood alone in her quarters, staring at the stars outside, a final piece of the puzzle slid into place. The transmission hinted at something far darker than the Deathworlders. There was another force and entity older than any known species. The NROC and the HFY were pawns in a game far larger than anything Hawkeye could have anticipated. Whoever controlled the weapon controlled the future of the galaxy. And now, Hawk had to decide who could she trust and who would betray her next. The atmosphere aboard the Juno's Fury had shifted. Tensions were at an all-time high. Hawk could feel the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. Her crew, once united in their mission to uncover the secrets of X9, now found themselves fractured, torn between competing interests. The NROC were on the offensive, moving swiftly to claim the weapon and with it, the galaxy's balance of power. The HFY, meanwhile, had thrown their support behind the humans, insisting that the weapon be activated to prevent total annihilation. And Hawk? She was caught between those forces, knowing full well that whichever path they chose, the galaxy would never be the same. It was clear now that the stakes had moved beyond simple survival. The weapon, buried deep within Xerath 9, was no mere tool of defense. It was something far greater. Something humanity's ancestors had created not for war, but as a safeguard. A fail-safe against the true power that had long controlled the fates of civilizations, the ancient entity that manipulated everything from the shadows. The Aimir were relentless. Ambassador Vale had become more insistent with each passing hour, practically demanding that Hawk activate the weapon. "The Enrak will destroy us all if we do not act," he had said. His cold, calculating voice left no room for argument. They were prepared to join forces, to throw everything they had into the conflict, but only if the weapon was deployed. "Captain, we need to make a decision," Silas said one evening as he entered her quarters, his face drawn tight with exhaustion. "We can't hold the Enrak off forever, and the IR are already preparing their fleets to engage. If we wait too long, we'll lose everything." Hawk glanced at the data screens that surrounded her. The Enrak were advancing rapidly, and despite her best efforts to stall them, they were getting closer. Her mind raced, conflicted by the Myers argument and the knowledge she had uncovered in the last few days. She knew the consequences of using the weapon. It was not merely a tool for destruction, it was a cosmic anchor, a key to stabilizing the balance of the universe. And that balance, she now understood, was the real enemy. The truth had come to her in fragments, slowly piecing itself together. The transmission from Xerath 9 had been the catalyst, but the more Hawkeye dug into the weapon's history, the more she uncovered the nature of the forces at play. The Enrak, once thought to be the dominant force in the galaxy, were not its true rulers. They were merely pawns in a much larger game. The weapon, Hawkeye realized, had been built by humanity's ancestors as a countermeasure to an ancient cosmic entity, an unfathomable intelligence that had existed before any known race. This entity, which had never been fully understood, had shaped the fates of civilizations, guiding their rise and fall, often from behind the veil of time and space. It controlled the Deathworlders and the IIR, and now, in its pursuit of galactic domination, it had turned its attention to humanity. The Enrak were merely its enforcers. The truth was staggering. Humanity wasn't just a random player in the cosmic scheme, it was a key, a variable in the entity's plan. Humanity's existence had been carefully manipulated to ensure that one day they would activate the weapon and, by doing so, destabilize the entity's control. But it was also humanity's greatest danger. The weapon was a double-edged sword, and Hawk was now holding the hilt. The realization shattered everything Hawkeye had believed. The war, the weapons, the alliances, it had all been part of an elaborate cosmic game. The true battle was not about survival against the Enrak or the IIR. It was about breaking free from the influence of an ancient, unknowable entity that had held the galaxy in a stranglehold for eons. The weapon was not just a tool to defend humanity, it was a means to sever the ties that bound them to this ancient power. And Hawk realized that to activate it was to risk everything, to risk the fabric of reality itself. But she also knew one thing: the Enrak had to be stopped. The IIR couldn't be trusted. The Deathworlders were pawns, too, driven by a fear they didn't understand. They had to be shown the truth that they had never controlled the galaxy. With this understanding, a sense of urgency overtook her. If humanity had a chance, it was now. The decision was not an easy one. Hawk stood in front of the weapons control panel, her hand hovering over the activation sequence. The crew was gathered around her, all of them waiting for her to make the call. Silas, Arlen, and the others looked at her, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. They had followed her into battles before, but this time was different. This time, it wasn't just their lives on the line, it was the fate of the entire galaxy. "Captain," Silas said, his voice trembling, "if we do this, we may never be able to undo it. We don't know what it will do to us. Or to the universe." "I know," Hawk replied, her voice steady despite the weight of the decision. "But we've always been the ones who are willing to sacrifice. If we don't do this now, if we don't take the risk, then we'll never be free. The Enrak will win, and humanity will never have a chance to be more than a tool in this cosmic game." With a deep breath, Hawk pressed the button. The universe itself seemed to shudder as the weapon came online. A deep hum filled the air as reality bent and twisted. The fabric of space itself began to unravel, breaking apart at the seams. A violent, invisible force surged through the galaxy, destabilizing everything in its path. Stars flickered out, entire systems collapsed into themselves, and the Deathworlder fleets, once a mighty force, began to implode, their ships torn apart by the unseen forces unleashed by the weapon. The Juno's fury rocked violently, as if caught in the middle of a cosmic storm. On the bridge, Hawk watched in awe as the stars around them warped, shifting into impossible shapes. It was as if the galaxy itself was being torn apart at the edges. She could feel the weight of history bearing down on her, the knowledge that this moment, this sacrifice would change everything. In the aftermath, as the universe seemed to settle into a new order, the Enrake fleets were no more. The IIIR had fallen silent. And the cosmic entity, the true mastermind behind the galaxy's struggles, had been revealed. But at what cost? As the Juno's fury floated in the stillness of the cosmos, Hawkeye knew one thing: the galaxy would never be the same again. The weapon had done its job. It had exposed the true enemy. But now, humanity stood at the crossroads. What was the next step in a universe that had just shifted on its axis? The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The aftermath of the weapon's activation left the galaxy in chaos, but there was a strange quietness to it. The Juno's fury and what remained of humanity's fleet were stranded in the middle of a universe on the verge of collapsing into oblivion. The vast war machines of the Deathworlders, the Anorak, lay scattered in ruin, their once mighty fleets now little more than debris drifting in the dark void. Their enemy was not humanity, not the weapon, but the ancient cosmic force that had been pulling the strings all along. Humanity had never been the true threat, nor had they ever been the galaxy's saviors. The weapon's destructive capabilities, its vast cosmic influence, had never been the real force in play. The entity, now fully revealed in its incomprehensible glory, was neither enemy nor ally. It was something older, beyond mortal understanding. It existed in the interstitial spaces between stars, a force that had fed on the rise and fall of civilizations, a mindless and consuming force that had no loyalty, no favor, no concern for life or death. The entity existed only to perpetuate the cycle, feeding on the expansion and collapse of power. Captain Hawk stood on the bridge of the Juno's fury, staring out at the destruction that now surrounded them. The stars themselves were flickering in a pattern she could only describe as the death knell of a galaxy. The fabric of space had been shattered, warped beyond recognition. The universe was breaking apart at the seams, but not in the way they had expected. The weapon had done its job, but not in the way they had hoped. Instead of giving humanity control, it had triggered the cosmic entity's full awakening, unraveling the very laws of existence. As Hawk's mind raced, she felt a deep unease settle in her chest. They had disrupted something far bigger than the Anorak, far bigger than the ancient technology left behind by humanity's ancestors. This force, this entity, was a force of entropy itself, a cosmic cycle that existed in all dimensions, all realities. It didn't care for the politics of the galaxy or the rise of any one species. Its power was beyond anything they could comprehend. In her heart, Hawkeye knew what the consequences were. It was the price of the weapon's power. The entity didn't care for power struggles or petty wars. The Enrak had been pawns in a game much larger than them, their bloodthirsty empire just another cycle in the entity's endless feast. But humanity had made a different kind of impact. Humanity's uniqueness, their capacity for resolve, to adapt and survive, and to sacrifice had forced the entity into an unforeseen position. It wasn't that humanity had become its enemy, but that their very will to survive had disrupted the cycle of destruction and rebirth that the entity had long depended upon. As the collapse accelerated, Hawkeye and the remnants of her crew gathered on the bridge, trying to make sense of what had happened. Their mission had shifted from a battle for survival to a battle for freedom. But the freedom they now faced was something entirely different. No longer part of the galaxy, no longer connected to the cycle of endless wars and power struggles, humanity had to carve its own path through a universe that was no longer the same. They were outside the boundaries of the known universe, untethered to the laws of reality they had once known. "We're free?" Silas asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Hawk didn't respond at first. She didn't have an answer. What did freedom mean when it came with the cost of total isolation? They were no longer a part of the galactic tapestry. The universe as they knew it, its stars, its conflicts, its alliances, was collapsing in on itself. And with it, humanity had become something different. Something new. They weren't just survivors anymore. They had ascended beyond the cycle of the wars, the empires, the endless fighting. They had broken the chain. The very will of humanity, its unshakable resolve in the face of the unknown, had been the force that disrupted the entity's control. But that same resolve had also severed humanity's ties to everything they had known. Their future was now uncertain. The final twist came as Hawk and her crew looked out at the vast emptiness around them. They had done the impossible. They had freed themselves from the cycle of galactic power, but at what cost? The galaxy was gone, the stars dying one by one. The weapon had destroyed their enemies, but it had also destroyed their connection to everything they once held dear. In the great expanse of space, humanity now stood alone. The Ayamire were nowhere to be found. The Enerike reduced to nothing, and even the cosmic entity had faded into the background, no longer a visible threat. All that remained was a blank canvas. A universe without boundaries, without structure. "What happens now?" Arlen asked softly, his eyes scanning the uncharted void ahead. Hawk stared ahead, her expression one of quiet determination. "We survive. We find a new way forward. The galaxy. It's gone, but that doesn't mean we have to be. We're free, in a way none of them could ever understand." Her voice trailed off as the silence stretched on, the stars now dim pinpricks of light in an ever-expanding emptiness. Humanity had broken the cycle, freed itself from the cosmic forces that had shaped the galaxy's wars. But as Hawk looked out into the unknown, a question gnawed at her. Was this true freedom, or had humanity simply traded one form of existence for another? The final question lingered in Hawk's mind, unanswered. What does it mean to be free in a universe that never asked for freedom? Was humanity, with all its flaws and triumphs, truly meant to rise above the endless cycle of conquest and survival? Or was it always meant to be something more, something beyond the reach of those who sought to control it? As the Juno's fury drifted alone in the dark expanse of a collapsing galaxy, Captain Lena Hawkey found herself wondering not just about the fate of humanity, but the fate of what it meant to be human in a universe that had never asked for them to rise above the stars.